11, verses 1 through 3. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for, certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, would you buy something if sight unseen, if you never took a look at it before you purchased it? Would that be a good idea? For example, a car. Would it be a good idea to buy a used car without looking at it, or having somebody with some kind of knowledge look at it? Why not, right? No, it's probably not a good idea. A house. Would you buy a house without first looking at it? Checking the neighborhood. Checking to see if it has a roof on it.
A house that's 1 year old is better than a new one.
A 1-year-old house is better than a new one because...
Because all the little things that were wrong at the beginning got fixed.
Oh, everything got fixed. Okay. Okay, yeah. I guess that makes sense. That makes sense. Or you can just build it yourself and then make sure that everything's good from the start. Well, we're going to talk about having faith in something we cannot see, in that which we cannot see, which it says in our verse today. Faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Faith is a difficult concept to explain to people who have no faith. The generation this generation and in this country, we are surrounded by people who do not understand what faith is because they have no faith. And faith is a gift. It starts from God. It is a gift of God. And it is believing, or not just believing, but the certainty. I like that, the word in our passage today. Certain of what we do not see. Certainty that God exists. Certainty that God's Holy Spirit is here with us. The certainty that Jesus Christ lived and died and rose from the dead and is now sitting at the right hand of God in heaven. Certainty of that. That's what faith is. And so we go in this whole chapter, the chapter on faith in the book of Hebrews. It goes through a whole list. We go through a whole list of faithful people from the Old Testament and why they were faithful. So let's take a look at that list. We'll start in verse 3. First off, the universe was made from nothing. Right? In verse 3 it says that. Formed, what is seen is not made out of what was visible. In other words, the universe was made from nothing. Now, modern day physicists, astrophysicists, cosmologists, I guess, whatever you want to call them, they say the same thing. They say, as far as they can tell, the universe came from nothing and then sprung into existence. A difficult thing to argue when you have no evidence or any way of explaining how something can come from nothing. But we have a way of explaining it, and that's God. In the beginning, God existed. And then God said, let the universe exist. And the universe existed. And so the universe came from God. And there's no way we can connect anything that exists in the universe to that moment. But we know it's true because we have faith. And that's what Hebrews says. It's faith that the universe came from nothing. By faith, verse 4, by faith, Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. And so Abel, he reaches back to the old stories and he said, Abel offered something that God found pleasing, that God found good. And we still honor him for that. even though his brother betrayed and killed him. We honor Abel because Abel offered to God a sacrifice that pleased God. Verse 5, Enoch. Now, you may not know Enoch. He's in Genesis chapter 5, verse 21, if you want to look him up. Enoch, it says that Enoch walked with God. And we're not sure what that means, other than that what we believe it means, which means he had a living, breathing, real experience with the Lord. And that's what we seek. And because of Jesus, because Jesus poured out his Holy Spirit on the whole world, we too can walk with God. We too can have a living, breathing, real, faith-induced experience with God that comes from our faith in God. But Enoch had faith so that he could walk with God. Even before Jesus poured out his Spirit on the whole world, Enoch walked with God. And then Enoch did not experience death. And there's two people in the Bible that I know of who didn't die. And that's Enoch is one, because it just says Enoch went off with God. And then Elijah, the fiery chariot, comes down and picks him up. I'm waiting for my fiery chariot. I'm still waiting for it. Any day, Lord, any day. Okay. So by faith, Enoch walked with God. Verse 7, by faith, Noah was warned about the flood. And that's a faith decision. Because obviously when Noah started building the ark, it wasn't raining yet. There was no rain. So how do you get it into your head that you need to build a boat and you need to save your family and your friends and you need to save a whole bunch of animals when it's not raining and the boat is far from water? How do you get that in your head? God told him to do it. And so Noah had faith in God. God tells him, build a boat. Noah builds a boat. That's faith. And so that's basics of what we're talking about today. Faith in the unseen. No evidence, right? No rain. No clouds. No bad clouds. No, I don't know, weather forecasters, right? There weren't any weather forecasters back then. I don't think so. He didn't have the Weather Channel. Well, how did he function without the Weather Channel? I really like the Weather Channel. I like the explanations of all the, how it moves, how everything moves through the sky. I like that. Verse 8, by faith Abraham was called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance. And so we've talked about that many times, how Abraham was told, okay, Abraham, pack up everything you have, all your belongings, right? Pack it all up. Take all your family, all your servants. He had a big group. There was a big group there. And then all your animals, and walk 1,000 miles to the west, to the land you've never seen, And I'm going to give you that land, but you don't even know where it is. I'll show you where it is. Now that's faith. That's faith. Abraham it's reckoned, in the Old Testament it's called reckoned as righteousness. Righteousness means right in God's eyes. So Abraham had faith because he did right in God's eyes. So he picked up and he took everybody with him. Verse 11, by faith, even though Abraham was old, was past age, which means pretty old, and Sarah was barren, they had a child. And the Lord kept telling Abraham, I will make unto you a great nation. And Abraham believed him. Abraham had faith. He had faith in God every time God told him, I will make unto you a great nation. But then when God tells Sarah, oh, you're going to have a baby, she's like, are you kidding? She laughs. It's like, you got to be crazy, because I'm old, and beyond my time. I'm done. Nope. God, they have it. They have a child because God is God. God can do anything, and Abraham had faith. We continue, verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. God said to Abraham, take your child, the child I gave you, the miracle child I gave you, the one that Sarah believed was not possible to have, this child that came when you were both old and beyond your time. Take this child, take him up to the hill, build an altar, and sacrifice him to me. And Abraham is going to do it. Abraham's going to do it because Abraham is a man of faith. If God tells him to do something, Abraham does it. Because he believes in God, he has faith in God, he has faith that God knows what's best for him. So he does it. And then God says no. Now we go down to verse 24. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. In other words, Moses, because of his faith in God, turned away from his lineage, turned away from the life that he had. He grew up in Pharaoh's house. That meant he was educated. That meant that he was surrounded by servants who took care of everything he needed. That meant that he had all the advantages that a person could have at that time period. All the advantages and more. And when he defends the Israelites and kills the soldier, he could have gotten away with that. He's one of Pharaoh's household. You can pretty much do whatever you want. You're connected to the king. You can get away with anything. He could have come up with a story, Could have come up with a reason. Could have come up with something. But decides, no, I'm done. As it says in Hebrews, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Says, no, I'm done. I'm done. And he leaves. Heads out into the desert. Didn't know what was out there. I mean, the Sinai, I don't know if you've seen pictures of the Sinai. It's not exactly a tropical paradise, is it? It's a pretty rough place. And there he meets his family, his future family, his wife's family, and they are Bedouins, and they take him in, and they're also Israelites. They're also connected to the Israelites, and he meets them, and that starts him on his journey to the mountain, the holy mountain, where he meets God. And so it says in verse 27, by faith he left Egypt. And then he said, he persevered because he saw him who is invisible. So that refers to meeting God on the holy mountain. And then it says in verse 28, by faith Moses kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. And so by faith, God says to Moses, God, am going to free my people, the Israelites, from slavery in Egypt. And I'm going to use you, Moses, to do my work. And of course, Moses says, you gotta be kidding, right? Not me, anybody but me. And of course, he has a whole list of excuses. He doesn't speak properly, and Pharaoh won't listen to him. He has a lot of excuses. But God says, go and do my work. And Moses has faith and goes and does it. And does the work that God lays into his hands, including the Passover. Where God says, okay, this is it. This is what's going to do it. You're going to be leaving now. Sprinkle the blood on your doorposts, and I will protect the children of Israel. And he does. And then verse 29, by faith people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, and when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. And of course, we know that story. We all know that story. Then comes the most interesting, I think the most interesting story, one of the most interesting in the Bible, and that's verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell. And then, verse 31, by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. Rahab is a peculiar person in the biblical story, because A, she's not an Israelite, and B, she's a prostitute. She's a very unlikely person. But she helps the Israelites at Jericho. And then she's welcomed into their community after she helps them. And then she meets and marries a good man and becomes King David's great-great-grandmother. So, and she's also in Jesus' lineage. She's an interesting person. And so she's in this list of the great heroes. I mean, and think of this list, the writer of Hebrews. This is a list of the great heroes of Israel. It includes all those that we talked about, plus Gideon's on it, and Samson and Jephthah and David and Samuel and the prophets. This is a list of all the great heroes of Israel. And here's Rahab. Most unlikely. Most unlikely. And why is she on there? Because she had faith. She put her faith and trust in God. Put her faith and trust in God. And so she's on this. And so if we go back to verse 13, it says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. In other words, God promises us, all of us, God promises us numberless blessings. As it says in the song we sing, and it's one of those old songs we sing, numberless blessings God promises us. But do we see them in our lifetime? No. For example, Abraham. It promises Abraham, you will be the father of a great nation, and there will be so many children, you'll have so many children, so many descendants, you won't be able to count them. And does he see that? No. No, because he doesn't live long enough. He doesn't live forever. And it's the same with everyone else. Everyone else. Rahab, for an example, would be Rahab. You're going to be the great-great-grandmother of the king of Israel, of a great king. Okay, well, am I going to live long enough to see that? No. But this is the promise. This is what we put our faith and trust in God, because God promises us numberless blessings. That in this lifetime, we will see blessings in this lifetime, but we won't see numberless blessings in this lifetime. We'll see numberless blessings when we're on the standing on the sea of glass at the foot of the throne of God, praising God with all the other believers. But in this lifetime, it says, they did not receive the things promised, they only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. Yeah. We see the glories of God as if we're seeing them from a distance. That's kind of the way it works. But that's what faith is all about. Faith is believing in the unseen. We put our faith and trust in God. We know God exists because of faith. We know God exists because of God's Spirit inside of us. But the only reason God's Spirit is with us is because of faith. And what is faith? We're putting our faith and trust in things we can't experiment on. We can't prove. Like I can prove, this stand exists. Well, let's look at the New Testament. Take a look at the New Testament. We have a story, one story I want to point out, the story of Thomas. That's a story where Thomas is struggling with his faith. Jesus has died. Jesus wasn't supposed to die. Jesus was supposed to be a new King David. That's what he was supposed to be. And he told people, I'm the Messiah. And their idea of the Messiah, Thomas's idea of the Messiah, is that Jesus is the new King David, because that's what he's supposed to be. But Jesus told him the truth. Jesus said, no, I'm not, my kingdom is not of this world. I'm instituting the kingdom of heaven, and that's going to be different. It's not going to be a physical, earthly kingdom. And so Thomas goes off and when he rejoins the disciples, this is John chapter 20, starting in verse 24. When he rejoins the disciples, he says, I'll believe it when I see it. I like that. When I can touch the man's hands with the whole nail holes in them. When I can see this bleeding side where he was stabbed. When I see him, then I'll believe that he's alive. And Jesus walks in and is alive. Yes, because this Thomas is the way most, at least in my experience, most people are like Thomas. Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it. I'll believe that that car is a perfect car when I can look under the hood and crawl underneath it with a flashlight and take a look at it. Then I'll believe that it's perfect. When I can look at the house from top to bottom, examine everything, including the foundations of the house, then I'll believe it's perfect. Most people are like this. But those of us with faith, we believe in these things, unseen things. And an example of that, Acts chapter 9, starting in verse 10. Acts chapter 9 is the story of Paul's conversion. God comes to Paul in a vision, and Paul is blinded. But then God, the unsung hero, I love unsung heroes. The unsung hero is Ananias. In verse 10, God goes to Ananias and says, Ananias, I want you to go to this guy Paul. Actually, his name's Saul at the time. Go to Saul, and I want you to minister to him. And Ananias says, is that the same Saul who's been arresting and murdering believers like me? Yup, that's the same guy. And I love what God says. He says, I will show him, Paul, how much he must suffer for my name. It's one of my favorite lines in the Bible. Because yes, when we become believers, it's not easy. It's never easy when we become believers. Nothing's going to be easy. I've learned that. But there you go. So how much he must suffer for my name. So Ananias has faith in God and goes to Paul and ministers to Paul and prays over him, and then Paul can see again. Now there's a man with faith, because he doesn't know what's going to happen. He knows God told him to do this and that and such and etc., etc. But once he says, okay, I'm going to do it, and starts down that path, you don't know what's going to happen. Things don't always happen the way you think they should, because God knows what's best. God knows what's best for us, and things don't always happen. They happen the way God wants them to happen, not the way I want it to happen. If things happen the way I want it to happen, our church would be full of people. The building would be brand new. And then I'd be up here, throngs of people just praising the Lord. Yeah. Things don't always happen the way we want them to happen. And maybe I'd have a really nice car too. Okay. So that Ananias, another great example of faith. A man who has faith. Now, in the modern world, of course, we expect things, we take a lot of things for granted that we don't understand. I mean, how many people here understand a cell phone? How a cell phone works? We got anybody who really understands how a cell phone works? Because I have no clue. I know it's microwaves. Well, maybe it's not the signals. I'm not even sure what the wavelength of the signal is. Honestly, I have no idea how it works. I have a vague knowledge of it, really, a vague idea of how it works. How many of us really know how the internet works? I mean, once again, I have a vague idea that there's routers out there, that the signal goes out through the cable line and goes off through routers somewhere, and the routers route the signal somewhere else, and then that comes back and it goes all over the place, and then comes back, and it's moving at pretty much the speed of light, which means it's fast, but pretty much I don't know. Like, I just use it, it just works, right? It works, but I really don't know how. How about even something simpler? Something simpler. How do they refine oil to get gasoline? Think about that. Okay, because I met somebody who did it for a living once. Worked over in Linden at the Linden refinery, and it was interesting to hear all the products that come out of it. I mean, oil is sludge, right? I mean, I've seen oil. Crude oil is sludge. It's just a big, it's just black, nasty sludge. And somehow we get gasoline out of that. Somehow we get kerosene out of that. Somehow propane comes out of that. And a whole bunch of other things come out of the sludge.
When you heat it, the boiling point.
Yeah, so it has something to do with heating.
It has to be heated.
Okay.
The sludge.
The sludge.
And then it condenses.
Okay.
And what condenses is what ultimately becomes the gasoline.
Okay, so somebody understands this, at least a little bit of it, right?
Yeah, depending on where you condense it and how it's done, you get different products.
Okay. Well, at least somebody understands it. Distillation.
Yeah.
See? Oh, this is excellent. We're getting somewhere. We are getting somewhere today, because we at least have a clue how gasoline is made. But think of how many things in our lives we take for granted that we don't know how it works. We have no idea how, airplanes. I love to look at airplanes fly, because I look at them and I think, how on earth is that thing flying through the air? How is it possible? Look at those tiny little wings on that thing, And there's 150 people or 200 people in that crammed into that little cylinder. How is that? It's just a miracle, isn't it? Amazing. And then just all sorts of stuff that we just take for granted, even if we don't understand exactly. So how is it possible? How is it possible that modern people have trouble with faith? How is that possible? When modern people put their faith and trust in so many gadgets, so much technology, so many things of this world that we do not understand, how can we not put our faith and trust in God? How can people say, oh, you can't prove God exists, so therefore I don't believe God exists? How is that possible when the same person can't explain to me how a cell phone works? or that person can't explain to me how an airplane gets off the ground. Or that person can't explain to me how you distill sludge and somehow it comes out as gasoline and we can use it in a car. I mean, how the heck, how is it possible that really smart people who understand more about technology and the world around me than I do, really, people are much smarter than me, say,